Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick with another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today I'm joined by Emily Newman, who is on the consulting team at Rodale and helps farmers navigate organic compliance as they transition to certified organic. She holds a BS in Environmental Resource Management, focusing in soil science from Pennsylvania State University, and is currently pursuing an M.B.A. in Food and Agribusiness from Delaware Valley University. Prior to joining the team at Rodale Institute, she worked at regulatory compliance of organics for a certification agency and materials review board. She is IOIA trained, a certified crop advisor, and serves as a board member for the Organic Materials Review Institute. Emily, welcome.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having me.
So talk to me a little bit through, you've got a lot of accomplishments here. What got you into farming though?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to work outside. That was really it. I don't come from a farming background. I didn't grow up on a farm, but a lot of my family members live in farming communities and had animals, and still currently do actually live on farms. And so I kind of was surrounded by farms growing up, but didn't grow up on one. And I was really interested in soil science, and it really wasn't from an agricultural perspective either. When I started getting interested in soil science, it was more from an environmental remediation perspective. And I started learning about soil science as a freshman in college, and realized that there was such a disconnect in my own life between soil and farming, and started doing more research then. And as a freshman, had the opportunity to see Ray Archuleta speak live at an NRCS conference. And so it was really inspiring to me to see this connection between agriculture and soil. So I started working on a farm, and it really just kickstarted what ended up being now a career in organic agriculture.
Very cool. So let's talk, talk to us about your role. So as an organic soil consultant, like what do you do? What's a day look like for you?
Yeah, I have, oh my gosh, so my days are so different depending on what's going on. But yeah, so my title is Organic Crop Consultant. I am the program manager for the consulting team at Rodale Institute. And we have a really awesome team that we've put together. There's Sam Malriott, he's the director of the program. And then we also have Leah Varecki, she's in Madison, Wisconsin, and Nick Podell, he is in Minnesota. And so really we are working across the United States right now, working with farmers as they, make a leap out of conventional agricultural production towards certified organic production. On so many different levels, both with landowners, with businesses, with beginning farmers, with veteran farmers. And so we're really working with pretty much anybody who's interested in learning more about what choices they can make on their operation to make that transition towards organic. So, a day to day, I even think about today as this perfect example of what my day to day generally looks like. This morning, I started out with a phone call with a farmer in Texas asking, talking about their pasture rotation plan. And then I drove out to a farm about 15 minutes from where I live to talk to a farmer about his livestock living conditions and potentially expanding his market opportunities into organic regenerative certification. And then, just got off of another call with a farmer in West Virginia who's planning his crop rotation for the year. And we talked a lot about how to reduce tillage in his operation and how, he can work on controlling weeds without having to till constantly and cultivate constantly. So, it really, my day varies, but I often am popping between Zoom calls with farmers, FaceTimes with farmers, and then on the occasion I get to drive out to the farmer and actually talk to them in person and see their operation.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you're a lot of it's on the ground, then a lot of it's online. So for your folks that are located, let's say in Minnesota, are they working with farmers there on the ground, or is a lot of it just Zoom calls too, or just over the phone?
Yeah, so what's so amazing, about agriculture is how it varies from region to region, and even, I'm situated here in Pennsylvania, and the conversations I have with my Lancaster farmers look very different than the conversation I have with my northern PA farmers. And so, when we decided, we were going to expand into the Midwest, that was really just a strategic decision by leadership to start expanding into the Midwest. We knew we needed people who were ingrained in those communities, and knew agriculture in those communities. And so, Nick's background is he's been in organic farming his whole life. His uncle was an organic farmer, and his parents work in the organic farming business. And Leah in Madison, Wisconsin, she worked for Dr. Aaron Silva, which is really spearheading the organic no-till research. And so each of these people, they come to the team with such an amazing background that then translates so well to help other farmers troubleshoot some of these issues they may encounter in an organic system.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So let's talk a little about soil science, because that's always definitely something that I'm fascinated about. And we actually work with a lot of farmers here on a lot more small scale. So we're looking, usually a couple acres. But, some of the stuff that we see is pH is like the pH gets too high and then we're trying to push it back down. Where have you seen success with that? What do you find works well?
It's really interesting. We see the opposite here in Pennsylvania, is that the pH gets so low, and we're often pushing it a lot higher. And so I actually don't have a ton of experience with high pH and pushing it down. But yeah, I'm more experienced with the lower pH side, because in Pennsylvania we need to lime on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah. And then with lime, you're probably doing either the high cal if it needs calcium and low cal if it needs magnesium.
Correct. Yeah. And that's with, my focus with being in organic production is that, we're really focused on trying to find compliant sources of lime, because, right now there's lots of lime available, and you can purchase an ag lime, but that ag lime actually might be something that's prohibited, like a slack lime or a burnt lime, which is generally calcium oxide. And so organic farmers cannot use those sorts of products that have high CCE values, and they're using those high mags and the low mags, and they're also using dolomitic lime.
Gotcha. Okay. And sulfur, that's obviously something that's really important too. What are you seeing with that?
That's an interesting question. Is we're really making recommendations based on soil test results. And so when it comes down to it, we are an independent crop consulting team. We don't sell any sorts of products, and we're definitely not here to sell any sorts of products. And so ultimately, we're making very unique we're making unique recommendations to our farmers based off of the results of their soil test and what they're intending to grow for the upcoming year. And so, we like to recommend soil testing once at minimum, sometimes twice per year. And even if they're experiencing issues, doing tissue testing during the year as well on their crops. And that can really give a lot of insight to what's happening in the soil. So, we really, even when it comes down to some of these like microbial products that are on the marketplace now, it's not to say that they're not going to be beneficial, but we really like to use science-based research to back up what recommendations we're going to make, and that ultimately comes down as to what's occurring in their soil currently, and what amendments and adjustments we need to make to get the results that they're expecting.
Gotcha. Now, how detailed of soil tests do you like to go for? Because obviously there's a wide range in what you can test. Do you have a specific range that you go for? Or does it really depend on where you are and what you're working with?
Yeah, so we always recommend just a chemical test generally. That's the once a year, twice a year recommendations in the fall and the spring. But right now there's been a lot of interest, I am sure by many of your listeners of like biological soil tests. And that's something that we've been seeing, great value in recently. They're being here on the East Coast, Cornell really spearheaded that and
Yes.
has their soil test, their soil health lab, but there's been so many other just private industry and also universities that have started offering those sorts of results at a lower price point that makes it a little bit more accessible for lots of different sized farmers. And I think that if a farmer has the opportunity to conduct some biological testing on their soil, again, once a year, they're a little bit more expensive. So if that's only a once every 3 years thing, that's great too. But it really helps with like tracking the improvements over time, what's occurring in your soil, but then, also what is not improving and what adjustments do we need to be making during the year to help counteract some of those issues we might be encountering.
So another question is, how many soil samples should you take? Because obviously, you're going to take a good different amount of spots in a specific field, but how much should you break that field up? Because one of the things is, like with a small vegetable farm, you can have like literally dozens of different variations in the field, but you probably don't want to take a test for each one of those. You want to kind of group them together so you're not buying 20 tests. Is there a rule that you guys have on how that works, or what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it really varies from operation to operation. But a good rule of thumb is if let's talk like just about a 1 or 2 acre vegetable operation. It's
Yeah.
really nice to be able to split them up into management zones. And so, if you have an area that you have, for example, some perennial fruits in, if you have some berries there, that could be considered one management zone. So maybe you take 5 different subsamples and
Yeah.
aggregate into one sample. And then you maybe have an area that is your perennial herb garden, then, that can be one management area as well. And then maybe you have a half an acre to 3/4 of an acre left over that you're doing your annual crops, and maybe do 2 different samples. You take 5 subsamples from the north side and 5 subsamples from the south side, and aggregate that. So really, I think that it's best if you do some of these like aggregate samples where you take, some people suggest 5, other people suggest 10 subsamples. I think 5 on a small operation is generally a good rule of thumb.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. 5 to 10. Let's talk about the hydrogen in the soil, because that's something I really have a hard time understanding sometimes, of why it shows up. And sometimes like it seems like the longer a farm is operational, sometimes the hydrogen is just like, it doesn't exist on the soil test. Like the other day I was looking at a test, and his brand new plots had like 10% hydrogen, but the other plot that had been there for a while had 0. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So, you're really getting outside. I know I said I have a soil science degree, and I do have a soil science degree. But really, where I'm really looking at the big picture sometimes
Yeah.
with our farmers, and as much as it is really nice to get into these little nitty gritty things, these, the hydrogen amount, should our sulfur ideally be? I think ultimately, if we're talking about soil health as a whole, we need to start thinking about, really the bigger picture, which is, what applications of inputs are we putting on, and what is our cover cropping plan, and how are we resting our soil from when it's, getting its cash crops in and out. So, that is really where a lot of my focus lies, is taking that information that Rodale, has published through their many years of studying, and some of these bigger picture items of, what are the best cover crop selections that we can choose for different times of year, and how can we really break up, a farm, so it's not just in this monoculture of, even if it's just a vegetable operation, we're not just doing, one group of nightshades and, and then rotating it out. And then, like I think about, especially in vegetable operations, there's lots of high tunnel production, and farmers start to see issues because, they do tomatoes and then they do cucumbers and then they do tomatoes and they do cucumbers after
Yeah.
that. And then they say, well, my tomatoes looked horrible this year and I had all these pest issues. What's the issue? It's, it's ultimately that we're spending too much time with the cash crop in the ground, and we need to be focusing on some rest, some adding in of additional amendments, and taking the time to allow it to get some weather on it. So as much as I love the detailed chemistry of it all, my conversations with farmers are really like large scale farm planning of how do we take that information and actually implement it on a macro level.
Gotcha. So let's talk about someone who is, let's say they're conventional and they want to go organic. And so maybe they've been in corn and beans and they're thinking maybe they're going to transition somewhat in the pasture for like beef cows or something. What's usually the steps for that?
Yeah, so we get a lot of calls from farmers who, have been and very much just conventionally farming for many, many years. And so, an average size farm in Pennsylvania for that is about 300 acres. You start getting a little bit bigger when you're in the Midwest. But, if we're talking about a 300-acre conventional farm, we really encourage our farmers to take it step-by-step approach. And so, this transition is, as much as we're here to help farmers transition to certified organic, we're also here to help farmers transition into better practices. So it doesn't have to be just about the fact of, okay, stop using chemicals and, put your land in pasture and I'll talk to you in 3 years. It's more about, let's talk about your goals. Is your goal meeting a certain yield? Is your goal meeting a certain income? Is your goal meeting a certain percentage of organic matter on your soil test results? And so everybody's goals are so different. So, we really start with trying to figure out what are the goals of that specific operation. And so if they were thinking, I don't want to till the land, I want to put this into a permanent pasture and we want to, rotate some cattle on it and, maybe rotate it in and out of small grain production, we're really talking about, looking at those soil test results, seeing, okay, where's our baseline? Where are we at? Do we have any issues we need to address? And again, here, it's a lot of it is we might need to address some pH issues. We may have some, low phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen just from pulling crops off year after year. So maybe there's some manure applications we need to be making before we put it into a permanent sod. And generally, we're recommending a grass legume blend depending on where they are in their location, and letting it rest for a year before slamming some cattle on it right away, allowing for some time for it to grow. And then, if they have what infrastructure they have, a lot of farms, if they're coming straight out of grain production, they might not even have the fencing infrastructure needed to implement a system like that. So oftentimes we recommend hooking them up with some funding sources, maybe some state grants or some federal grants to help implement some better pasture management practices. Maybe it's electric fencing, maybe it's permanent fencing. Maybe it's a livestock water crossing because they have a stream running through their property and we need to build a buffer area so that, the cattle is not destroying the stream. And then after we have those conversations about what are the conservation practices that are needed, then we can start having a conversation. Okay, how do we make this certified organic? How do we get you a price premium for the work that you're doing?
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. Now, when people are moving to that pasture, going from like a grain to a pasture, they usually plow that between, or they do like a no-till transition with a no-till drill.
Yeah, so it really depends. If they're going from grain to pasture, there's a couple different options that can be considered. And I'm actually dealing with this right now with a farmer, and they were in conventional soybean production, and the farmer wants to transition to organic, and they have a little bit of risk that they're able to assume, so they're going to just put it into a cover crop for a year or 2 years before for considering what their next cash crop is going to be for their organic harvest. And so this is a little different, is that they're not planning on grazing. They're actually not really even planning on making any money off of this small portion of their operation as they start making that transition to organic. And so the land was bare when the soybeans came off in November. And so it's been bare through the winter time, which is not something we'd normally suggest, but they didn't have any opportunity, they didn't even have access to the land until January. And so, there's two different options in here, which is the first option is, a frost seeding option of like a medium red clover, is that you can kind of get into the field to broadcast seed during this freeze thaw cycle as it gets colder and warmer. And what's really good about that is that you're not really disturbing the soil in any way. There's no tillage event really needed because the freeze thaw cycle is making that seed to soil contact for us, which is excellent. There is also some issues that come with that method, which is if your soil test results are a little out of balance and you need to make soil amendments. We actually talk about this internally within the consulting team, is that if you add a fertilizer when it's bare ground and there's no seed, you're just fertilizing the weeds. So it's never a good option. So if that route doesn't work, we then take the route of tillage. And that is really, we just want to do one tillage event so that we can establish a good solid seeding, get that great seed to soil contact, make any amendments that we need to, so that we don't have to till again for 2-3 years afterwards. And we can really just make that one event to establish something really great, get that green cover on immediately. So it really, really depends. It depends on a number of factors. But I would actually say, interestingly enough, is that we're not seeing a ton of farmers wanting to go from classic conventional corn and soybean into a pasture for an organic rotation. It actually, generally what we're seeing is the land has been in the CREP program in CRP for maybe 5, 10, 15 years. And so it's kind of permanent sod that is generally kind of full of weeds because it's been unmanaged in a sense, and we're getting a lot of phone calls to say, okay, what's the next step now? I want to be in organic production. I want to be in organic something, whether that is a grain rotation or making a permanent pasture, doing some hay cuttings, and that is where it gets a little tricky, is because you've got this permanent sod, you've got a pretty strong weed seed bank after 15 years of just kind of, light mowing every once in a while per your contract. And so that's really where, we struggle internally. Of course, we want to make the best recommendations we possibly can, which is reducing tillage and making suggestions for inputs that are natural and non-synthetic and are good for soil building. But it's really difficult to come out of this CRP and directly into a grain without some sort of disturbance of the soil surface to allow for some good seed to soil contact to get a good crop in there. So again, we can focus on growing one good crop so we can follow it and reduce the amount of tillage in our system in the long term.
Yeah. So that's actually the reason I asked that specific question is I've actually had to do that a couple of times. The new farm we just bought, we came out of, conventionally, no-till corn and beans for probably 60 years. And so literally like those herbicides, and last year they put on 11 different herbicides or 12 different herbicides. I mean, it was 2,4-D, it was, dicamba, it was Roundup, it was, all the fun ones. And just after coming out, just watching that weed seed bank just explode. It blew me away. Even so, we harrowed it a couple times just because we're going into vegetables, and with vegetables, weeds are really bad. So we harrowed it a couple times, and then it went into a cover crop, and we saw some weeds come back, and then we no-tilled a second cover crop, and it looks pretty good now, but I'm still worried about some of those weeds coming back next year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like it's really cool to hear you say how, you did it once and then you follow with a no-till drill to do it a second time. And that's really what it is it's taking the time and knowing that the first year you're not going to bury everything. There's no way. You know, if you're just going through and disking, you know, you're never going to be able to bury all the weed seeds in the bank. But, you know, if you take the time, like mowing it and then reseeding and mowing and reseeding, you know, over the long term, you can really reduce the weed seed bank. But yeah, it's interesting to hear you say, you know, after years of like herbicide applications, the weeds explode. And it's just because, you know, we've been masking the problem. We haven't been solving the problem. We've just been masking the problem.
And it's really interesting the amount of perennial weeds that came back. Like we had a vining milkweed, which was a brand new one for me. And then of course we had some bindweed, and there was some Canadian thistle, and I don't think we had any perennial grasses. So we didn't have any quack grass, or not a lot of Bermuda either. So a lot of it was those annuals with those exceptions right there. But fascinating just to kind of see, you know, what it looks like once you kind of open that ground back up. But those herbicides, literally, it's, you know, they're only effective for a very short time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, thriving farmers, have you checked us out on YouTube lately? We have a bunch of new content there, including a few rants by me. I want to tell you, you don't want to miss them. I actually go rant about, you know, some of the problems I see in our space and some of the challenges I see farmers facing. So go check that out. We've got instructional videos over there as well. Talk about setting up our new farm here in Ohio and all the steps we're going to do that, as well as just tutorials and tips on best practices for all sorts of things on the farm. So go ahead, check over at Growing Farmers on YouTube and see the new content we put together for you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about these folks that come to you. They want to go from the CRP, or they want to go to an organic crop system. And 3 years is a long time if they're going, you know, they're going to go get certified. What are they doing in the transition years? Are they just selling stuff on the open market and taking a loss? How do they weather that transition normally?
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many different options for farmers right now for their transition years. And you know, I'll mention a few options that might be of interest to some listeners. And so some of those is, you know, we get contacted by you know, just recently I was out to visit a farmer. She had been farming organically on some rented ground, and just recently purchased her very first farm with her husband. And they want to get certified organic. That's all she knows how to do. She only knows how to grow certified organic vegetables. But the land she of course purchased was in conventional agriculture. And so, you know, she's in this situation where she's trying to build a farm in a new area and build a great market and tell a story about her operation as an organic farmer. But unfortunately, she's unable to get certified until at least 2 years from now, following 36 months of free from prohibited substances. And so, you know, we've had a lot of conversation about, you know, what is the opportunity to, during this time, to hopefully both tell the story of her farm, of what she's doing, but then also attract that premium for the fact that she is doing, you know, everything organically. She's doing everything correctly. And one of the things that we always talk about is just telling your story. And I think one benefit that, you know, not to just plug our program, but just using Rodale as a platform to tell the story of the farmer. And so, you know, we've had some interviews together that, you know, we've written about her operation so that she can use that information to truly tell the story of what she's doing to improve soil health and to make that transition to organic, and what that actually looks like, and the hard work that a farmer has to put in to make that happen. And so I think that's really helped her in the long run. I really hope so. But you know, it's really great to see farmers continue to stay dedicated to the organic transition, even though, you know, they're not able to use that USDA seal. But, you know, that's generally a vegetable operation. And I'd say in general, probably similar to a lot of your listeners, is that many of those farmers are farming organically. Like they're using all the correct practices. They're maybe the only slight disconnect is that they're just maybe not documenting everything in, you know, in an organic compliant fashion. But I'll say that, you know, a lot, and I think there's probably a lot of myth surrounding this, is that you have to do a 36-month transition, and that's not true. The 36-month transition starts from the last prohibited substance date. So if somebody's considering getting certified organic, and they've been farming organically, as long as they have some documentation to showcase that, then they could ideally get certified at any given time. And so a lot of our farmers are often in that position when they call us, is they say, well, I've just been doing this and I finally want to get the premium for doing it, and I want to use the USDA seal. I want to have access to these different markets. And so that's one option. And I'll say, that's our vegetable farmers, but we do work with a fair number of grain farmers, and what we're really pushing for, and have had a lot of great support from the private sector, is transitional contracts, so that the farmer can start their transition and they can get a small premium during those 2 seasons of transitioning, so that can help buffer the costs during their organic transition. And then on year 3, they are locked in on an organic contract as well. So basically, we're looking at like a 3 to 7 year contract with some of these grain farmers, that they're able to, farm organically while they're still considered technically conventional or in transition, and get a small premium that's buffering. Maybe they need to make some additional equipment costs or some equipment changes, or maybe there is some increased labor costs during that 3 years, and that really, that additional income that they're getting during this transition period through some of these transition contracts that are starting to come about really help with that. If that transition contract doesn't exist in the marketplace, then we generally suggest a couple different routes. One of those is that it really depends on, again, the amount of risk the farmer can assume. If the farmer needs to be continuing their crop rotation of corn and soy to get that income, so that in year 3 they can sell a certified organic crop, then we try to help them navigate a non-GMO market. And right now they can get about 50-cent premium on corn for non-GMO, and about $1 premium on soybean non-GMO. So that helps a little bit as well. But really, ultimately, the best scenario possible is that they are working on transitioning land in a piecemeal opportunity. So they're maybe taking 10 acres or 50 acres of their 300-acre farm, and putting some of it in cover crops and allowing it to rest, and really focusing on addressing some of the soil needs, and then continuing maybe farming conventionally on the rest of the land, getting an income on the rest of the land, and then just making that transition step by step. It doesn't need to happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't need to happen in 3 years. It can happen over the course a decade, if that's what they need to choose to make it happen.
Yeah. I just got a message on our Facebook page, and unfortunately, I don't get to respond to all of them because there's just so many that we get. But this woman reached out and she says, how does one even get started in such an expensive industry? My dad is a conventional monocrop corn and soybean, no-till, and it's littered with pesticides and herbicides. It would cost millions to buy him out, which I do not have that kind of money, and no bank would ever give me a loan or even half his seed bill. I do not want a monocrop. I want, she goes into talking about how she wants to do regenerative agriculture and the different people she's following and all the things she wants to do. And, but I think it comes back to what you just said is, obviously, like, the problem with conventional agriculture and the problem with how it runs is just there's so many expenses out there. I mean, like, look at the $500,000 equipment and the cost of farmland, and as she's saying, the cost of the seed bill. But I think kind of talk a little bit about that. I mean, and the essence of this too is like, yeah, she's not gonna have those millions of dollars, and if her father is not interested in her taking over and just wants her to buy him out, that's going to be incredibly hard. But there is a way forward.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow. I actually had a very interesting conversation similar to this route with a John Deere tractor engineer that was in Iowa. And, he was asking me, Emily, like, how do you can we even make this work in the Midwest? And I'm making the assumption that this particular person, the Facebook comment is from the Midwest, but I would assume, based off of the size of land she's talking about, a tract of land, she's probably somewhere, between North Dakota and Texas.
Yeah.
So, and so, with that, it is that like, it's true. The conventional industry got so big so fast, and the opportunity to, like for any of these people to buy out a conventional farm that's 10,000 acres, 15,000 acres is nearly impossible. And so what we've had a lot of successes is, with our farmers in the Midwest is, again, starting really, really small. And so some examples of how that transfer of land ownership from one generation to the next has looked successful is just starting by taking some land out of conventional production. Maybe that is the most vulnerable land, and putting it into CRP or CREP, and just getting a small payment for that land to be kind of out of conventional production for a period of time. So maybe that's 5% of your land. Maybe that's a vulnerable piece of land that's near, a stream or a water area, and just taking that out of conventional production and allowing it to get a payment for a period of time. Maybe that's 5 years, maybe that's 15 years. But then when it comes out of CRP, it is going to be eligible for organic production. Now, going back to our previous conversation, it is difficult to come out of CRP if you're not willing to till a little bit or some soil disturbance, but it is a way to continue to get some payment on some land where it doesn't have to be monocropped. It can be a different option. And then the other step would be then taking some land, maybe just a small portion. Maybe it's just one of the tracts, or maybe it's just one small farm within this larger farming thing, and just start experimenting, start figuring out how you can implement cover crops in the rotation. It doesn't even have to be, we don't have to totally take everything out of the system from the first day, but start really small and figure out, how do we start making sure we can get a cover crop in between each of our cash crops that are going in. What does that look like? And okay, now maybe we previously only had it in 2 years of hay. What does it look like if we did 4 years of hay? And started implementing a little bit more like diverse hay mix into that. So, we always suggest really starting super small. Like, we would never say, yeah, buy all 10,000 acres and farming it organically right now, because that is not really a successful model unless you have millions of dollars. And right now, lots of farmers don't have that, and I don't know any farmer who really has that. So it's just, we would say start really small, and then also, I guess the other side of that is, in a lot of these scenarios, it's landowners. It's not necessarily the farmer. So it sounds like this particular person isn't a farmer herself,
correct,
but maybe it works within the farming enterprise. And so it's also about finding people within your network that that meet the goals that you're trying to reach. And so, if you continue to re-sign leases with farmers without having conversations with them first about what expectations you have on your land, then the farmer's going to just continue business as usual. But if you incentivize that farmer to start implementing some conservation practices like cover cropping, or like reduced tillage practices, or maybe figuring out some ways to implement a roller crimper to reduce the amount of herbicide to terminate the cover crop, those sorts of conversations, if the farmer is open to it, then, you can build a system together, both between the landowner and the farmer. But if you never have those conversations and you're not present at the table, then the farmer is just going to continue doing what the farmer knows best how to do. So we found a lot of success in just kind of asking the landowner to start opening up a conversation. And a lot of farmers a lot of landowners have had a lot of great success of, the farmers like, oh yeah, I've been wanting to experiment with that thing, but, I just maybe didn't have the funding to do it. Could you, help me apply for an EQIP grant so I can, you start implementing cover crops? Or do you think you could, buffer, reduce the rent I'm paying on the lands, and I'll start implementing those practices. And, oh, I could really use, a long-term lease agreement, and then I'll help you with your transition. So there's so many ways that landowners and farmers can work together to reach those goals. But it really just starts with a conversation first to figure out what it is that, that they can do together to meet that.
Yeah. And again, if the farmer's not willing to go there, you're fighting an uphill battle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, we've been in tough situations like that. Is, we want to, as Rodale and as the consulting team, we want to support every farmer to farm, with conservation in mind, with organic in mind, with regenerative in mind. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of education, but you're right. Sometimes it is an uphill battle. And as much as we never want to say, yeah, okay, maybe it's time that you find a new farmer, because that's the last thing we want to do. We don't want a farmer to be out of some land, or out of a job, or, out of income because of the choice that the landowner is making. But, sometimes it's time to move forward and find a farmer who is willing to help the landowner reach those goals. And right now there's a lot of young folks that want to farm organically and want to farm land. So, how we can figure out how to hook those people up with the landowners who have the land and want their farmed that way is a big question that I think we are trying to answer every single day.
What's your favorite strategy or tool as you're trying to transition to organic?
So it's great. I absolutely love, I actually used this one today while I was sitting at, a picnic table outside in the snow with a farmer. And I was asking him, what would be, if money wasn't an option, what would you, and this was in regards to a livestock housing structure. Because, he has a tie stall farm, and he is looking for ways to move away from tie stall barns. And I said, okay, if you had unlimited money, unlimited resources, what could you imagine as a livestock living area that would be really great for your animals as far as welfare goes, low cost for you, low labor for you, stays warm during the winter time, and cool during the summertime, and everybody's happy. And so we started talking when he's like, well, I'd want this and I'd want that. And in my head I started thinking, okay, well, I know somebody who could potentially build something like that, and I know these people that have implemented a similar structure. So how do we hook those farmers up that have dreams of making it happen with other farmers who have made it happen? And then, what are the missing links? Maybe the missing link is funding. Okay, well, how do we hook them up with a contract that can, help alleviate some of those costs? So I really like to do a little bit of the dream big, and then, work the realistic side of it, because a lot of times it just is that the farmer maybe doesn't know somebody who's already done that. And, before working for Rodale, I worked in organic inspecting. So I had the opportunity to see, hundreds of different farms within Pennsylvania, New York, and Maryland. And so, every time somebody's talking, oh, I want to implement this, but I'm not exactly sure, I'm like, oh, I know a guy who actually did that. Let me see if you guys could hook up and, have a phone call together. And sometimes it really comes down to, like, I want to build an implement for my tractor, and I just don't know how exactly to do it. And it's like, oh, well, I know a guy who builds implements for his tractor, and maybe he would know. And so it's about creating that network and finding, the correct farmer to hook up another farmer with to make it a reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that network aspect of things. And it's awesome now with the network that we have and just the reach that we have, the connections that we can make. So I absolutely love that. Emily, where can people find out more about you and the work you do?
Sure. So we have a website. It's Rodale Institute, and that's rodaleinstitute.org. And we have a consulting web page, and they can contact us by emailing our consulting hotline, which is consulting@rodaleinstitute.org.
Okay, very cool. Emily, any final thoughts?
No, this has been wonderful. I hope that if any farmer is interested in transitioning, I should note that we are offering free consulting services to farmers in Pennsylvania, all the way up to North Dakota and down to Kansas. So it's about a 13-state region till it's all said and done between the upper Midwest and Pennsylvania. So if anybody would just like to chat, to talk about their operation, to maybe talk about some innovative ideas they've wanted to implement for a while, but just maybe needed the encouragement to do so, they can call us and we'd love to chat with them.
Very cool. Well, Emily, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Michael.
Hey, farmers. Next week on the podcast, I'm joined by Stan Bialecki, who is farming in the northeast corner of Pennsylvania. They actually have a hydroponic operation with a little bit of field production. So I wanted to have them on, hear how they do farming hydroponically and what it takes to run a farm. They are full-time farmers, so it was really interesting to hear their journey and how they went from part-time and slowly scaled the farm up till it could support their entire family. So join me next week. Listen to Stan. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.